Servlet API provides methods to check how session ID is getting exchanged using cookies or URL rewriting. So let us learn these methods. These methods are defined in HTTP Servlet request interface. Let's learn the first method, is requested session ID from cookie. This method returns a boolean. This method returns true if the session ID is exchanged using cookies. Next method is requested session ID from URL method. This method returns true if the session ID is exchanged using URL rewriting. These methods are very useful if you want to take some appropriate actions based on the session ID exchange scheme. Next interesting and useful method is requested session ID valid. This method is very useful when you will like to check if current session is valid session or not. It checks if the session associated with this request is valid or not. It returns true if the session is valid in the current session context. Now let us see these methods in action. So let's move to our Eclipse environment. Now we are in the Eclipse environment. Here we will understand how we can find out whether the HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookies or URL rewriting. As we have learned, we can use the methods provided by HTTP request interface for the same. Let us open second servlet that we have created earlier. Let's move to doGet method. Here first we will check if HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookie or not. So over here we will be using is requested session ID from cookie method of HTTP Servlet request object. Then we will print a message accordingly. So let's write the code as if request dot is requested session ID from cookie is equal to true. Here we will print the message as HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookies. Thus, if the HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookies, then we should see this message. Now let us deploy the changes and let's execute first servlet from Internet Explorer browser. The server has started. Now let's move to Internet Explorer browser. Now I'm in Internet Explorer browser. Let's execute first servlet. There you go. The first servlet has executed successfully. Now let's use the link and let's move to second servlet. You can also see the message. HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookies. So this means that cookies are enabled in Internet Explorer browser. Hence, HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using cookies. Now let us learn the other method if the HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using URL rewriting. So let's go to second servlet. Now we are again in the Eclipse environment. Over here, let us learn how we can check if HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using URL rewriting. So we will write the code as if request dot is requested session ID from URL is equal to true. Let us print the message as HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using URL rewriting. So that's it. That's all the code that we want to write. Now let us deploy the changes and let's execute first servlet from Firefox browser. Remember, we have disabled the cookies in Firefox browser. Now I am in Firefox browser. Let's execute first servlet. Now let's use the link and let's move to second servlet. There you go. You can notice that the HTTP session ID is getting exchanged using URL rewriting message is getting printed. So this is how one can programmatically check what session ID exchange technique is used currently. With this, we complete this demo.